Stuff I absolutely don't know how to do. Building a cabin from big logs. building a table from a pallet so it doesn't look like a pallet, building a stool from a rotten trellis, making log benches, making a workbench from big poles, cutting down a tree with an axe, and that is just the beginning of what I don't know. But I don't know that I don't know. So let me take you on a journey to my backyard in Denmark, where this dumb guy lives, with 2 left hands and no tools yet. This video is filmed over the course of 3 years in my backyard, starting with dismantling pallets with minimal tools, building garden tables, benches, a greenhouse and a cabin, and ultimately building my own woodworking shop along the way. It all started in the summer of 2020, where we couldn't travel anywhere and we didn't know what the future would bring. So I grabbed that opportunity by grabbing some old pallets I planned to burn or dump at the recycling station. I know I'm lucky to have some space around me, or actually it is not luck. I chose not to live in an apartment a long time ago. I decided not to have a cafe or shopping opportunities just around the corner, which was very fortunate when it was all closed down anyway. This is one of the first things I have ever built, and looking back almost 4 years later in my woodworking journey, there are definitely some things that I would have done differently. I still have the table, and a little later in this video I will show you what it looks like today. The good thing about using pallet wood as your primary source of wood is that it is free. I hear from people from different parts of the world that pallets are not free and not lying everywhere. But in many countries they actually are. I live in Denmark, in the northern part of Europe. I get pallets from stores and factories in my area that get goods delivered on pallets from different parts of the world. A lot of these pallets are outside any recycling program. And another good thing is that this wood is already sawn and milled up for you. You get some boards that are pretty easy to use right away in your projects. The only drawback of using pallets is that you must take them apart and remove the nails. I have developed a lot of methods of doing this, and I will show you some more examples later in the video, and also with some better tools to do so. For now I'm using my sledgehammer and a pry bar to dismantle this pallet. A brilliant trick for hammering long nails out is cutting them short with a bolt cutter or an angle grinder. Of course, don't just let one part of the nail drop to the ground outdoors like I did right here. I had quite a party getting the parts up with my magnet again. But the short nail is easy to hammer out. So now we have a bunch of boards without nails ready to assemble to something again. I listed an advantage of pallet wood being milled and sawn up for you a minute ago. And you might think, isn't all lumber milled and sawn up for me? And that is very true if you take a trip to any wood section of a big box store. In the same way that food is nicely killed, packed and pre-cooked for you in any grocery store. But my backyard isn't a grocery store. To appreciate the pallet wood a little bit more, here is a little peek into what it actually takes to get from a big tree to usable lumber. In January 2021, I decided to see if I could take a big tree down the good old-fashioned way with only using an axe. And let's just say I didn't complete this task on the first day or the second. I'll show you what I made from this tree a little later and also how it came down exactly. A few years later, my daughter and I started building an off-grid cabin from blown over trees from a nearby forest. The amount of work required to move logs out from a forest and cut them up to lumber to build from, you can't imagine. But we will also get back to that build. Moving on with the garden table, the next project is creating the tabletop from the boards. Essentially, it is just gluing them together. But to be able to do that, I need to prep them a little. I had just gotten a used thickness planer, a massive upgrade from using my belt sander to flatten and smoothen boards. So I ran the boards through the thicknesser on both sides, and a trick I think I may have invented to make the sides of the boards completely straight and ready to glue together. I just clamped them together, standing up, and run them through the thicknesser until the blade has contact with all the boards. That is simple and effective. And some people can't stand that I put clamps through the machine. Well, you just have to deal with it. So here is a little rundown of a cheap joining tool I learned about from watching Mike Farrington, thanks Mike, who showed me the mighty biscuit joiner. A biscuit joiner works by cutting a little groove in the opposite edges of two pieces of wood. Wooden biscuits, which are small oval-shaped pieces of compressed wood, are then inserted gently into these slots with some glue. This tool is commonly used for aligning edges in woodworking projects, and I'm making woodworking projects, such as cabinet making and tabletops. And this is my first tabletop ever, and I'm also about to make a giant mistake. But hey, I'm just a kid playing with Lego here. Or actually, I'm playing with pallets and biscuits. Remind me not to eat any of these, because I love biscuits. After the glued up boards had dried overnight, I subconsciously decided to make a mistake. I believed I was clever when I cut the tabletop in two. Then, continuing my cleverness, I used 3 short rafters from the pallet and inserted them into the other direction to avoid cupping in the future. Brilliant. Because at this point I hadn't figured out what to do with the legs yet, or any base of the table, but we will get to that. After another night of glue drying, I believe this pallet wood tabletop is pretty sweet. Well, except when I discovered a bunch of ugly nail holes in the top. This is pallet wood, yeah, there are nail holes in pallet wood. And this shouldn't surprise me since I just removed the nails from the boards. But I am a little dumb. Well, now there are several ways to go about nail holes. And the easiest is leaving them in there and just call it the rustic look. Another is filling them up with sawdust and glue or some other wood filler. But this is future Jesper talking. 2020 Jesper had this set of Forstner bits with let's call it a caulking bit. If you know the proper term for this, let me know in the comments. The idea is to drill out the nail hole with the first bit, and with the bit counterpart you drill this caulk out from a similar piece of wood. Then you just glue the pins or caulks in the holes. If you're really fancy, you can even align the wood grain direction to match in both pieces. Let's just say I wasn't fancy. When the glue had dried overnight, again, a little action with a Japanese-inspired pull saw cuts all the caulks flush. The next step is cutting the table to size, and I do that with an old circular saw that I got used from a friend for free. To make this act like a track saw and cut a straight line, because we like straight lines apparently, I clamped down my level, that is not so level anymore, and used that as a track or guide. And the sharp viewer noticed my little wood block here, which best translates to a circular saw spacer thing. If you have a track saw, you just align the edge of the track with where you want to cut, but with this homemade guide rail, I need to account for the footplate on my circular saw. So to avoid measuring for every cut, because I hate measuring, I made a spacer that is the width of the plate on the saw. That's pretty brilliant for a guy like that. I'm sure you like to watch people sanding, but still I don't. So while I sand this tabletop, let's quickly look at some of the awesome tools we will use later in these backyard builds. I'll be using a tenon cutter to make lock benches, a big auger drill bit to make some giant holes in wood, and I even got a sliding bandsaw, also known as a sawmill. I still can't believe I was able to get that. Anyway, I use it to cut up logs into lumber. And when you need to move big logs around, you also need a log arch like this one I'm using to lift and transport big logs out from the forest and home on the bandsaw, like I did with my daughter when we started building a cabin from these. We dragged logs out of the woods, milled them up, and then directly began putting them together to form the base construction of the cabin. You mount the floor and the rest of the house on this thing. And I can already hear the internet scream at me in the comments. Don't you need to dry wood before you can use it? And the answer is, hey, just a quick thought. Why don't we finish the garden table and learn something before we get too deep into the backyard log building? After I sanded the tabletop with a belt sander and then a random orbital sander up to 150 grit sandpaper, I took a very cheap router from Skill and mounted a 45-degree routing bit to make these chamfers on the top. At the beginning of the video, I said I didn't have any tools. That was almost correct. Honestly, when I started in 2020, I had a cheap drill and a handsaw, and that was it. But when I started showing a slight interest in woodworking, some family members came around with some of their used tools. My father-in-law gave me his old circular saw and a drill press. My father had an old compressor and a nail gun. I bought some cheap tools like a track saw from Einhell and this router from Skill. I also saw a lot of makers on YouTube using a table saw, so I bought the cheapest one possible from Jesper. At this point, I had spent less than $500 on tools. I need to make a base for the table and some legs. I found a pallet with long rafters, so I decided they would have to work as the legs. So I liberated them from the pallet wood boards, and after making sure there were no nails left in them, hopefully, I split these wonky rafters in two. My tabletop could cup in the long direction after I cut it in two, so I decided to put two of these rafters in the long direction. Then I made two X's from the remaining four rafters and mounted them under the table. What I didn't know then was that by making something from pallet wood, filming it and sharing it on YouTube as my first ever YouTube video, I was actually joining a cult, the pallet wood makers cult. And as with any cult, they also have haters. I was about to find out. When I told my wife I was building a table from pallets, she imagined a big chunky table that still looks like a pallet. And she hates the look of pallets made into furniture. But when she saw this table, she was more like, what kind of finish do we put on that? So I could almost touch the sweet, sweet feeling of victory. I was one step away from getting a piece of pallet wood furniture wife approved. This is probably one small step for mankind, but it was a giant leap for Jesper. To avoid them from starting to wiggle and wobble after some time, I mounted 2 angle pieces to support those legs. This is actually a very sturdy and lightweight table. I started the finishing process by setting the table on fire. Some of you may think I finally got to my senses and decided to burn this pallet wood creation. And you're right. I wanted to try out the old Japanese way of preserving and protecting wood. So I fired up my torch and gave the table a good burn all over. After the table was charred all over, I took some sandpaper and removed the loose particles from the burn. I had mixed up some beeswax with linseed oil, my own natural wood finish, and I gave the table a good scrub with that mix. So this is the finished table, made from one pallet and treated with wood burning and beeswax and nothing else. And I still have this table 4 years later, and I'll just run and get some footage from it. I'll be right back. And while I wait for my future self to return with some fresh footage from the garden table 4 years later, including the mistake I made, let's dive into building the foundation of the cabin. When we decided to build our own cabin, we also built the base frame elevated from the ground level. I saw people like Pew Miles build his cabin on top of some big rocks, and he's in Australia, which is pretty dry. We're in Denmark, where it's not pretty dry. It is pretty cold 6 months every year, and we get a lot of rain and snow, and the temperature fluctuates more. So elevating the structure helps to prevent water from accumulating around the base. That can lead to rot and mold. So we put these concrete post supports in the ground. They are built with these post anchors where you can adjust the height after it is put in the ground. Heavy rainfall is increasingly becoming a problem in most parts of the world, and my hope with this elevated structure is that the water will just pass underneath here. We are also building it on this uneven terrain, so elevating it means we don't have to level the ground beneath it. I keep saying we when I talk about this cabin build. It's because I'm building it with my daughter. She asked if we could build her a cabin together, and none of us had ever built anything with a roof before. But I just like the idea of her being able to build a house with her own hands somewhere out there in the future. So this cabin build is a perfect project for learning basic house building techniques for both of us. And learning to use tools like a circular saw, a nail gun, drill and a chop saw. And not only hand tools, she quickly learned to operate the sawmill, which became very valuable a little later in the cabin build. We needed wood to build the base frame, and a year before, a storm took down a few trees in a forest that is literally only a 2-minute walk away from this cabin. The forest owner asked me if I wanted the trees, and when I looked at them, I discovered they were black alder trees. So I looked up black alder, and it looks like it is known for its natural resistance to rot and decay, especially if it is not in direct contact with soil. This makes it a solid choice for the elevated frame of the cabin. So we dragged the logs out from the forest, put them on the sawmill and started milling up timber for the base frame. And almost immediately after milling the wood, we started building from it. Even my mother, who has absolutely no experience with or interest in woodworking, asked me if the wood didn't need to dry before I could use it. I think we need to take a little wood history lesson. This obsession with drying wood is a rather new thing. Furniture carpenters and timber framers have in most of woodworking history used wet wood to build from. And when I say wet wood, I mean green wood, fresh wood, wet wood. Let's call it wet wood. They were so skilled, they just accounted for the shrinking and the movement of the wood when constructing the furniture. So over time, the joints and fittings would just tighten up more. Timber framers, the guys building houses and structures from wood, still prefer wet wood. It's easier to shape wet wood, it is cheaper, and it is way more accessible. And when done right, having the wood drying in the position where it's supposed to be sitting can tighten the joints and make the construction stronger. Unfortunately, I'm not an experienced timber framer. I don't make the fancy joinery that I would like to make. The most fancy joints I'm currently making are half-lap joints, which is basically removing half of the materials on both pieces so they fit together. That's a pretty effective joint in many cases, and I'm using it a lot in this base construction. We slam the base together with big wood screws and wood glue, and we don't tighten it or screw it to the anchor posts in the ends yet, allowing it to move a little bit over time. We'll get back to the cabin build, because let's just go a little back in time to my first experience with building from wet wood. I was taking down this poplar tree with an axe, remember? And oh boy, did I get comments on axe size and many other things. Apparently there's a lot of axe tree felling experts on YouTube just hanging around and waiting for something to comment on. And I may have become a part of the pallet wood cult, but I have definitely not become a part of the axe felling cult. At least not yet. I had just gotten a sliding bandsaw, so I was looking for something to cut up. My neighbor had just taken down some poplar and pear trees in his garden and dumped them at my place. I'm apparently the kind of guy that people dump their wood with. So if you ever find yourself needing to get rid of a forest or maybe just a few trees, remember, I'm your guy. Just be sure to give me a heads up before you start seeing my yard as your personal lumber dumping ground. These poplar guys are very wet. They still produce green leaves, so they are perfect for my little wetwood building experiment. This was the summer of 2021, and it is now 3 years later. I still have the benches are made from the wet poplar wood, so we can take a trip to the future later and see how they are doing. It's generally not recommended to use poplar for outdoor use because this wood is not naturally resistant to rot and insect attacks. So, of course, that is exactly what I plan to do. The plan is to make a lot of log benches to have around our garden and the house, and to try out my new Tenon cutter. I really appreciate that you have been sticking with me for this long in the video, and I feel we should get to know each other a little better. I live in Denmark, and if you could just type in the comments down below where you're from, I'll be happy to say hi to you. I have a friend, an American, who moved to Denmark and started to learn Danish. He told me we have a very unique word in Denmark that became one of his favorite words, and I think it's a word that we will have some good use of knowing going forward in this video. There isn't really an English word or sentence that means the same, but the best way to describe this word might be a combination of never mind, let it go, or it is what it is. So the Danish word for all of this is pyt. Yeah, just pyt. So the next time you're stuck in traffic and late for a meeting, or your woodworking project goes completely bonkers, or your SD card crashes with 1 week of footage on it, remember, shake your shoulders a bit and say pyt. Pyt. I will need to use this word a few times in the upcoming builds, so I thought I would just bring you up to speed with a little insight into Danish culture and language. You're welcome. This is one of the first times I have used this sliding bandsaw or sawmill, and I'm pretty excited about it, but bear with me if I'm looking a bit inexperienced. I can already imagine what the comments are going to look like, and yes, most people do not have a horizontal bandsaw in their shed. There are many ways to mill lumber for log furniture, and before I had this saw, I used my chainsaw to mill lumber. I've been working and saving really hard to be able to get this saw, and this small model is really not that expensive. But if you have access to logs, it's a really brilliant way to be able to turn logs into usable lumber for your wood projects, and a ton of other uses. I'll show you some crazy uses a little later. This log is no problem for the saw, and I aim to get 3 big slabs out of it. And I plan to make 5 log benches, 1 really long and 4 shorter ones. So I must cut 2 slabs in half. And after debarking the slabs, I start on the joinery. Joinery on log furniture is pretty simple. It is more or less just drilling holes to hammer the legs into. So I pull out my 2-inch Japanese auger drill bit and start drilling some holes. I really like to work with auger drill bits like this one. 2-inch bits like this are not easy to find, but I am super impressed with the sharpness and precision. It drills perfect holes into these poplar logs, and even my little cheap Einhell drill seems to be able to turn it around. And a little later in the video, I will try to use this auger bit to drill down a standing hardwood tree. For the legs, I'm just grabbing some branches and I'm using a 2-inch tenon cutter to cut the tenons on the legs. The primary function of a tenon cutter is to shape the end of a piece of wood into a tenon, which will then fit snugly into the corresponding mortise, aka the hole I just made with the drill. Imagine you are all geared up for a long session of tenon cutting. I know I was. But the drill you have is a budget-friendly, slightly underwhelming Einhell drill. And apparently, cutting tenons is quite a hard job for this little fellow. After 4 tenons, that is just one bench, Einhell started to smoke. It wasn't just being dramatic, it literally died half through the 4th tenon. And I guess I'll just have to say put and move on. I got through the rest of the tenons with a combination of all my other drills, some of them ported. I also ordered the most powerful drill I could find, a Makita 40-volt brushless powerhouse that I will test a little later. If you have seen any of my videos, you know that my favorite way of treating wood for the outdoors is by burning it. Bugs, fungus, moisture hate the charred burnt wood. Burnt wood is even more resistant to catching fire. What? And it's a natural and safe way to treat wood, unless you burn it down of course, and it will last for a long time, if you don't burn it down. I treat the bottom of the legs with linseed oil to make them more resistant to rot and moisture. I'm burning the top of the bench until it's black, and then I brush it gently with some sandpaper. And then I pre-treat it with some linseed oil. After the oil has soaked in, I gently heat up some of my beeswax mixture. I have a video on my channel if you want to see how I mix it. This has made the surface of the bench completely water resistant for many years. And I've used beeswax on all my outdoor tables, benches and chairs. It will be interesting to see if this works on fresh wood and how it will develop over the next few years. The benches have been left outside for the last 3 years, and I'll just go and grab some footage of them and show you a little later in the video. The only thing left now is inviting family and friends to celebrate midsummer in Denmark around the bonfire. This was a very special midsummer for me because it was one of the last times my dad was able to visit me, and he was very impressed with my use of poplar. he got sick and died a few years later. I miss you, Dad. I know he would have loved the cabin build that I'm now doing with my daughter. I love the cabin build too. We have the elevated base structure in place, and the next thing is putting insulation in place between the wood posts before we start putting the flooring in place on top. I figured we could use some pallet wood to rest the insulation on, so Julia got to work mounting some thin rafters along the beams, and then she is putting some pallet wood boards on the top with a bit of spacing for ventilation. This prevents moisture buildup in the future. I hope so. A big part of this build is what I call top management, because of the frequent showers from above, and it will only get worse. So after some days of heavy rain, we removed the tarp and got to work sorting out the boards that we had for flooring. This is actually 150-year-old flooring we got for free by picking them up a little earlier. We noticed a nearby house started to throw these fine boards out of the windows. What? So we knocked on their door and asked if we could pick them up. And guess what? We could. So we got the boards home and we denailed them and we cut off the most damaged parts. So now we are just playing around with the flooring to find their best use on top of our little platform here. These boards are really solid with the tongue and groove intact on most of the boards. Who would throw these out? So after we had decided what boards to use, we gave them a quick cleanup using a small desktop thicknesser. This minor operation was challenging for this little machine. Still, we got the boards to a bit more uniform size and at the same time leaving some of the use marks on the wood from its previous life. Some of the charm of building with historic materials such as these is that this little cabin is getting deep roots into history and stories to tell those who visit. We still needed to figure out where to get the wood for the cabin timber frame, but then I talked to one of my neighbors who had previously been in the Christmas tree business. He had a place with some old noble firs that had been used for producing greenery, and he was looking to get that area cleaned up. Still, it was only accessible briefly when the cornfield around it was harvested, and suddenly he called me and said that window was now, so I had a few days to harvest as much as possible before they would plow the field and make it inaccessible again. So I started up my old tractor, grabbed my chainsaw and drove off. I realized we have talked a lot about building with logs, milling up logs and even more stuff with logs. So while Jesper is off to harvest some more logs, what? More logs? Let's talk about pallets and some pallet dismantling. We should have plenty of time to cover this because I have seen this guy getting logs. It will take him some time. Many woodworkers see pallet wood as junk wood, full of poison, pesticides and chemicals. And they also see the people building stuff from pallet wood as some sort of scamsters. And I'm not thinking about anyone in particular here, Chris. Indeed, pallets are often made from the sapwood part of trees, but that is still usable. It's illegal to treat pallets with chemicals, they are only being heat treated. And also I avoid dirty pallets, painted and spilled on pallets. My love for pallet wood started as a practical thing. It was available for free, it was already sawn into boards, and it was an opportunity to reuse something that would otherwise have been burned or buried in a landfill. Also, I prefer the look of recycled wood with some history to that of new wood. But also the message that it sends. Recycling, reusing, that kind of stuff. I started dismantling pallets in 2020, and here is my guide with the best and the worst ways to taking pallets apart. I'm going to dismantle these 4 types of pallets, including one huge pallet dismantling failure. I'm also giving you my best tips for tools to use and what definitely not to use. More about that in a moment. The Euro pallet. Many people seem to avoid Euro pallets like the plague. Still, they are actually very easy to take apart because they have a lot of weak spots. First, get the bottom stringers and the blocks off. Take a sledgehammer and tap the blocks slightly on the sides, like you would knock on a door with a do not disturb sign. Okay, maybe a little harder. In a horizontal position, the system with blocks and stringers is very strong, but if you put it up vertically, it becomes weak immediately. The next step is removing the large nails that connects the top boards with the blocks. You can shoot them out with a reverse nail gun, but if you don't have one, like I didn't have at this point, the best way is just cutting the nails short and then play a little game of whack-a-mole. Hit the short nails one time with a hammer, turn the pallet over and remove the nails with a pry bar. With the big nails out of the way, we just need to get the top board separated from the stringers. Most people would take a crowbar and start twisting the boards apart, but don't do that. I have made my own pallet buster kit. It is just 2 rafters that came from a pallet, of course, and I call them Pallet Buster 1 and 2. Place number 1 on the ground, place the pallet over it and just tap the stringers lightly with number 2. And you will have the board separated from the stringers fast and without any splintered boards in most cases. The pallet almost takes itself apart. Well, almost. You still need to do a little work, okay? We still have the bottom boards with the blocks on them, and you know I like to use all wood from the pallet, including the pallet blocks. So here are 3 techniques to get these pallet block teenagers to leave home. One way of getting them off is to hammer a crowbar in and twist them off. Not the best way. Another is hammering them off like this. Not the best way too. The best way is to fasten the block in a vise and use the board itself as a lever. In a moment, I'll show you some of my weirdest pallet wood projects. But first, we should talk about the sawzall. If you mount a demolition blade on one of these things, it will cut through wood and nails, and many people praise this method of taking pallets apart. Like in this very popular video, don't use a hammer. One question, if you cut the nails, you are stuck with 2 parts of the nail in the wood. One in the top boards and another part in the bottom boards or in the blocks. They will be very hard to get out. So here I'm planing pallet wood boards for the garden table build. And with nails stuck in the wood, I would be unable to use most woodworking tools like saws and planers on it. And I could definitely not have made this tabletop from pallet blocks if I had left all the nails in the blocks. This is a North American type of pallet, and this one is extra strong with 5 stringers. I'm pretty sure I can take it apart with my homemade pallet buster kit, but let's save it for a little later. This is a different kind of block pallet, square in diameter, and it is pretty strong with bottom boards in both directions. No obvious weak points. I prefer to cut these boards with a circular saw. I use these boards for many things, like making this pallet wood wall in my workshop. And then again, just put it in vertical position and use a hammer, and I can disassemble the rest with my homemade pallet buster. Now my take on the American pallet. This pallet is about 10 years old and the wood is very thin and fragile. The board just splinters on me, and there is no other use for this than the fire stove. Some pallets are just not worth it. Here are my tips for what pallets to use and what not to use. So okay to use, does it have the HT stamp? It means the pallet has only been heat treated. Is it clean? A quick visual inspection should reveal no oil stains, dirt or mold. And what about the origin? Try to get pallets from businesses that ship non-toxic goods such as hardware or grocery stores. Not okay to use. Stay clear of pallets marked with MB, that is metal bromide. And also, if a pallet has unknown stains or chemical smell, it is best just to leave it. I would also leave painted and colored pallets and also overly worn and damaged pallets. Just leave them. Seen from the outside, this is just some guy jumping on an old tractor and driving 10 minutes over to his neighbor's cornfield to pick up some logs. What's the big deal? But thinking back on it a little later, I think this was the moment when I realized something important. My father gave me this tractor. He died in 2022, and I'm just so happy he got to see the beginning of my journey with wood. When he was sick the months before he passed away, we would sometimes sit and watch videos from the Northmen together all evening. Especially the video grandfather reminded him of his own father when he was a kid. I still have a private playlist on YouTube with the videos we would watch. So driving out to this field on my own and also having his old chainsaw with me along with my own just gave me this journey through a spectrum of emotions. Mostly thankfulness of being able to do this and also having a part of my father with me in what I do. And that I'm being allowed to do this with my own daughter. So I got to the noble fir spot and started taking down a few trees closest to the field. You can see there aren't many big branches left on these big logs because they have been used to harvest greenery for Christmas for many years. These trees have already served their purpose, so I'm just happy that we can repurpose them meaningfully to build a cabin. Otherwise, they would probably just end up as waste or, in the best case, maybe be shredded into wood chips for gardening or to be used as fuel in a biomass burner. Noble fir is also known for its straight grain and low weight, so it's really optimal for timber framing or whatever it is called what I'm about to do. It's also pretty resistant to rot and pests, so I'm just glad that they can contribute to a cycle of sustainability. After putting them down, luckily out on the field, I started to remove whatever was left of branches and also cut up the logs into pieces that would fit on the sawmill. My homemade log mover can only take one log at a time, so I'm just having some mornings and some evenings where I'm driving back and forth with logs. Sometimes Julie came with me to help me prepare and load the logs. But then she shifted job and became the master of the sawmill. She started to mill the wood for the timber frame while I was going a bit back and forth with more logs. The important thing I realized was a profound sense of continuity and connection to my roots, and also a newfound meaningfulness with my work with wood. My father may not be here, but my daughter is. And someday out there in the future, she'll be building houses or cabins with the people that are important to her. And it started with this little cabin. So, before we go into building the timber frame for the cabin, I would like to take you back to another little build that was sort of my first timber framing build, even though it was just a little stool. So the whole story leading up to this was that I was still in the first year of my woodworking and YouTube adventure. I saw another woodworker from Australia announcing a little competition that he called Rubbish Wood. Basically find some really rubbish wood, I can do that, something that would have no other destination than the rubbish bin or the fire stove, and build something from it. Put it on YouTube and some judges would take a look at it and announce some winners. Easy. So my thought process, or just process going into this was, I have rubbish wood, check. I do sort of woodworking, check. I also film and upload to YouTube, check. What I didn't do at this point was talk to the camera or talk at all in my videos. So how do you tell a story without any words? That was the real challenge that I put myself up to with this little project. Storytelling without words. Looking back at it now, let me try to explain some things that people might or might not notice, and also let's have a good laugh. I found an old scaffold walking board that was in pretty bad shape, to say the least. It should have been trashed a long time ago because it was way too dangerous to walk on. But I decided that was a good starting point for a video, having a piece of wood that was very close to end its life cycle as wood. My plan was to clean it up off camera, but then I saw all those lovely snails having a party on the wood, so I decided to film when I relocated the inhabitants to other parts of nature. That's not exactly the cycle of life, but at least taking care of other living creatures. And this wood gets a second life. This scaffold platform is held together with some threaded metal rods, and very optimistically I gave the bolts some WD-40. But that was a bit optimistic, you can see why. Some outdoor and then also some indoor cleaning of these pretty rotten rafters, and then I ran them through the thickness planer, discovering there actually was some solid wood parts in these rafters. So far, the storytelling has been pretty straightforward in this build. Find wood? Check. Save inhabitants? Check. Clean wood? Check. But at this point I started to think about the ending of this little video, and I tried to incorporate some elements I would use later. I had gotten my first request for a sticker swap, so I had an envelope all the way from down under in Australia. I was also cutting down the rafters on my miter saw, and I recorded all the rotten offcuts going into the bin because I had a feeling that I would need those a little later. The next part of the build is a basic glue up. I add ordinary wood glue to the sides of the rafters and clamp them together. For the clamping part, I'm using some homemade pipe clamps. This is the absolute cheapest way to get a glue-up clamping set. The clamping part is very cheap in most big box stores, and you just screw them on a water pipe in whatever length that you want. The glue dries overnight, and I started to think about how to make the so-called bum groove in the seat. There are hand tools to do the job, but I had another idea, which I didn't see Jackman Works do first. I'm pretty sure he watched me do it first. Okay, so it's way easier to just show it than to try to explain it. So far, I have taken a building material that was, let's just say, less than ideal, cut away the most rotten parts, glued the remaining parts together, and formed a seat that is pretty solid and bum-friendly. And yes, wood glue joints are very strong. This seat will hold even the biggest of bums, and I'm not thinking about anything in particular here. Now heading into the legs build, I had this idea to build the base without screws and nails. I had success using my new little palm router here to make the bump groove, so I thought, hey, let's try to make some joinery with the router too. If you have watched this video so far, and I trust you didn't skip any chapters, you know that I like Sorry, that was my daughter starting to laugh in the middle of my voiceover. If you have watched this far in this video, and I trust you didn't skip any chapters, you know that I like to burn treated wood that is meant to be outdoors. And this little stool is no different. I decided to change location to the woods for the sanding, not really sure why, but perhaps to mark the change to a more spiritual part of the build and to illustrate a deep connection with nature that may or may not be there. And of course, she did it again. And of course, sanding outdoors requires less dust protection. Give me a rating for connecting all the ends here. I took the offcuts from the stool and put them on the bonfire. Then I used the envelope from a friend in Australia to light the offcuts on fire. I had some beeswax and I borrowed my daughter's cast iron pot and melted it directly on the embers of the offcuts. I then finished the burnt stool with the hot beeswax, in which I mixed some linseed oil. This is my own natural wood finish mix, and using the offcuts to heat it and apply it to the remains of the wooden trestle creates a cycle of creation and transformation, at least in my head. It reminds me of a line from one of my favorite TV series, where the main character keeps saying, "Everything is connected." And honestly, the more I think about interconnectedness, nature, recycling and relationships, the more I realize how true this is. Everything is connected. I'm very lucky to have a wife who loves gardening and growing our own food. So when she asked me if we could build a temporary greenhouse, a structure with a poly cover on it, I said yes, because that means more food. And I made this structure from materials that I found around our house. See this build in a moment. So a newspaper interviewed me recently and I was asked to give advice. Me? Give advice? Really? Okay. On how to become more sustainable in your approach to woodworking and building in general. So my answer is to be less perfect. Accept that your project has a rustic look. Enjoy the story rather than all the flaws. There's probably many. I made this wall in my workshop from pallet offcuts, and it has become the thing that people talk about. Well, that was until I made a workbench from these very reclaimed poles, some old chipboards from my father's barn, and covered it with log and grain slices. More about this build shortly. The cabin is coming along nicely, but slowly. Building with reclaimed materials just takes longer time. Julie is making the interior of the cabin, and I'm making the exterior, and it will be finished this spring. And depending on when you're watching this, there will be a full build video on the channel. I promised to show you the pallet garden table and the log benches 4 years later, and here I am in the future, not keeping you in the dark any longer. I gave the garden table to my wife, and it has been her steady companion over the last few years in and around her little greenhouse here. Nothing has been done to this table after I finished it, and here is the problem. The end pieces are mounted directly on the boards, and when they expand and extract over the course of a year, they will cause a gap in the tabletop. I didn't know about wood movement when I made this table. The log benches made from green poplar are holding up very nicely. There's one right here in the greenhouse in perfect condition, but the others have been left outside for the last 3 years, so let's take a look at them. One of them is down here in the fenced garden. It is doing pretty fine. The big one is outside my workshop, and there is absolutely no sign of rotten or loose legs. And these were just some poplar branches. So let's turn back to the building of the poly greenhouse and the reclaimed workbench. My wife and I wanted a polytunnel greenhouse so we could grow more and become self-sufficient with vegetables. I had this wire mesh from an old wood pellet container that I wanted to get rid of. And I thought it might work as structure or hoops for the tunnel. First I had to get it out and see what measurements I could build the tunnel in. After measuring the wire mesh and consulting with my wife, of course, who wanted as big a tunnel as possible, I decided to go for a 3 meter wide and 6 meter long and 2.5 meter tall tunnel. That's a pretty big polytunnel. I cut the wire mesh to size. When cutting with my angle grinder, I realized I could just have used my bolt cutter for the thin wire. So I have the wire mesh and the basic layout for the bottom frame in place, and I will now move it to the polytunnel site and continue there. This is the site, and we have been using it to dump garden offcuts for some time, so I will have to move that. I figure this could make a start for some compost bins, so I'll start by building a compost bin. This is the site for the compost bins, and after cleaning the area, I go find some stuff to build from. So if you didn't skip anything up till now, you know that I'm a pallet guy. So I'll just use 4 pallets and 12 screws, and then I think I have made myself a compost bin. So one of the two things that I bought for this build was 4 concrete foundation blocks, the same kind we used for the cabin, to make sure the tunnel does not blow away in the storm. And it will also lift the wooden base a bit off the ground, so I'll just need to dig 4 holes to put the blocks in. One of the cool things about these foundation blocks is that you can adjust the height of them after you have put them into the ground. That's a good feature, as the site is not level here. My wood for the base structure is not wide enough for the fitting on the concrete blocks or long enough for the full length of the tunnel, so I'll just need to add some blocks and prolong the raft a little. I always use wood glue when screwing 2 pieces of wood together. It holds up so much better. I'm adding supports in the corners and in the center of each side. Before I go on, I treat the base with some clear wood preserver on all the sides. When everything seems pretty level, I fasten the base to the foundation blocks. For attaching the wire mesh to the base, I decided to cut some pieces from this metal hanger strap with holes. These metal strap things were perfect to fasten the wire mesh to the base frame. I shifted between mounting them horizontally and vertically to be sure the wire mesh could not move. After attaching the wire mesh in the first half of the tunnel, I put up some structure that will hold the wire mesh in place and give me something to mount a door on. Yep, that is pretty square. I also make a structure in the middle of the tunnel and in the back end. In the back of the tunnel, I made ready for a window to be put in later. I never did that. For ventilation if needed. I bought a sheet of 10 x 6 meters of PVC cover that will almost cover the entire tunnel. I fastened it with cable ties to the base frame all the way around. We had an old kids' playhouse that we had planned to take down for several years, and I needed some wood for the siding of the tunnel, so I figured I'd reuse the playhouse in the pony tunnel. And if I did not have this old playhouse, I would probably have gone and used some pallet wood instead. Use whatever you have. My wife is starting to prepare the tunnel for growing vegetables. She started with a layer of cardboard, and then she'll put a layer of horse manure and compost on top of that. There's a storm coming up and we need to secure the tunnel fast. I need to make a door really fast. So we covered the door with the PVC cover and fastened it with a Stanley sharpshooter. You can use any kind of stapler. This temporary greenhouse served well for 3 seasons, and now we need to change the PVC cover to a newer and better one. But it is really nice to have early potatoes and late tomatoes growing here, along with a lot of other vegetables that I almost can't name. So I just got an order for a big epoxy table project for a customer. Whoa, I got a customer. But Houston, we have a problem. I don't have a big enough workbench to build it on. I'll need to start on the customer project in 7 days. And with the timber prices these days, I have to build the workbench from reclaimed or free wood. Oh hey, I'm Jesper, and I'm building a workbench hopefully from old horse barn poles, pallet wood, old chipboards, an old dining table, and a log I found in my backyard. There are apparently logs laying around in my backyard. And I need to finish it in 7 days and keep the costs as close to as close to nothing or zero as possible. It is winter in Denmark and I'm inside preparing for this build. I found this old video about a simple workbench build from DIY for knuckleheads. Let's check it out.
It's got to be tough, sturdy, cheap.
Since I'm kind of a knucklehead myself, I'll try to follow the basic principles from this build. I haven't got any plans for the build except my own little drawing here. Wow. I'll start the build by making the legs.
2 pieces screwed together to form one solid post.
I have a couple of big old poles from a horse shed or a horse barn, and I think they'll be more than solid enough on their own, so I'll just cut them to length on my miter saw. I'll need to connect the legs with a rail, and the video suggests not just bolting it on the side of the legs, but cutting off half of the thickness of the leg for the rail to rest on, and that's in both directions. That is too complicated.
Now before you say, oh, that's too complicated, it's really simple.
He suggests to make some cuts with a circular saw and then chisel the material out. But my legs are a bit bigger than my circular saw can handle, so I'll start the crosscut on my miter saw. And then I'll reach deep down into the ancient ways of woodworking, and I'll find a handsaw to remove the rest of the material. And before I know it, I have 4 posts ready. Now I'll need some long pieces of wood for the rails, and I have this long horse shed pole. It is way too thick and way too long. After some denailing, I decided to split the pole on my bandsaw. Yeah, I have turned my bandsaw over and put it on rails. I guess you could call it a sliding bandsaw. It is no problem splitting the pole in half, and without a bandsaw, I probably would have used a handsaw, or maybe a table saw, or my chainsaw, or splitting it with an axe and wedges. Yes, you can actually do that. I'm turning the whole thing upside down for assembly, and I'll glue and screw the rails together, and I'll also mount the legs on them with some more glue and more screws.
Next thing we need to do is add some extra support for our bench top. And you do that by adding these noggins. So let's fit in like that.
For the support, I'll need to go diving into my reclaimed wood pile, and that's a big one. And I found some usable rafters from pallets and shipping boxes. I found an old beat-up dining table at the roadside, and I'm hoping I can use the table base support for support of the lower part of my bench. It is a little long, but I'll just fix that with my good old handsaw. I made the legs a little short so there's space for some casters. This is so heavy, there is no way I can move it around without them later. Hello?
Jesper, my old Scandinavian scallywag. How are you, mate? It's Shane Conlon.
I don't know anyone with that name.
It's Uncle Knackers from DIY for Knuckleheads. You knucklehead.
Oh, that's Shane.
If I'm right, I think you're building one of my projects right now.
Yeah, I'm building it right now, but how could you possibly know that?
Yeah, didn't you just leave me a comment saying that you are literally building it right now?
Yeah, I did. But it is really not a good time right now.
Yeah, look, I just wanted to offer my help.
I'm sorry, I gotta go. Well, what a weirdo.
What? Interesting guy. Danish.
The workbench is looking more like a workbench now, but somehow some of the support pallet wood sticks out a bit, so I'll just need to adjust some of them with my good old hand plane. And there you go. It is time to mount the sheet that will make the top surface, and I have this sheet of foam ply that I'll try to mount on the base. I noticed that Mr. Fancy Knuckle DIY guy also glued his top on, but I'll avoid the glue and just mount it with screws. This is in case I'll need to change the top later. And this is future Jesper talking. I needed to change the top later. Instead of just having one big shelf under the table, I'm planning on filling it up with drawers. So the first step is mounting some sides so I have something to mount drawers on. I have these old chipboards that I got for free from a demolition in my dad's barn. Using a circular saw on old dusty chipboards indoors creates a lot of dust, so I switched to a handsaw for a few cuts. Before long, I had 4 vertical sides mounted under the table. The weather finally got a little better and I have moved outside to cut up the old chipboards. All the sides of the drawers are 22 centimeters in height, so I might just cut up all the boards into 22 centimeter strips. I do that with a track saw and a spacer that is 22.1 centimeter long. That is some inches, I don't know how many, but you figure it out. I can now cut all the strips to length on my miter saw that's got proper dust collection. From here it is just making a lot of boxes. For the bottom of the drawers, I have some sheets of plywood from shipping boxes that I'll use. I could have cut a groove and slided the bottom in, but that just takes a few centimeters off the usable height inside the drawer. Instead, I'm just gluing and brad nailing it directly to the bottom, and then I'll trim it with a router and a flush trim bit. That's easy peasy. I'm not worried that the bottom will fall off because the old IKEA sliders that I'm mounting it on will attach at the bottom, not the sides, so the plywood bottom will rest safely on the sliders. I'm definitely not a cabinet maker, no you're not Jesper, but somehow I managed to mount 10 drawers under the workbench. Woohoo! I'm not a big fan of the chipboard look, so I'm trying to come up with a little plan to make them disappear. I could paint them, but that would just look like painted chipboard. Who likes that? So while I'm waiting for creativity to strike, I'm going to Instagram. My mate Tim from the UK is trying to split a log into cookies with a handsaw.
It's actually fairly easy to cook, there's just a lot of it.
Yes! Yeah!
Get in!
This just gave me an idea for the workbench. I could cover the drawers with cookies. I have a handsaw and I have a lock. I'm going to do my own splitting. Hey, but wait. It took him 4 hours. And after all that work, it's gonna take me days to cut all those cookies.
Remember, Jesper, you're the guy with the sliding bandsaw. You've got to use that to your advantage.
Then I suddenly remembered that I have a sliding bandsaw. And what if I could mount the log vertically in the saw and use that?
What a top little project!
Yeah, so I'll just see if Uncle Lagos has some final words of wisdom that I can use to make this workbench better.
I've left a list in the description box down below of the materials and some of the dimensions.
Wait,
for
what?
this project.
That sounded like plans. Did you have plans for this on your website all this time? Yeah. God.